About her needing to be the loudest voice in a place that used to be quiet. But I wasn't about to be bulldozed. Not after everything I'd built, both above the ground and in myself. Let her call her meetings. Let her draft fake violations. I had the truth, the deed, and about 37 hours of trail cam footage. This wasn't just a standoff anymore. It was becoming a siege. And I was ready. 3 days after the fake legal letter, the situation mutated from annoying to outright deranged. I woke up at 6:12 a.m. to the sound of distant whooping, the kind that didn't match birds or coyotes or anything you'd expect in a quiet lakeside morning. I walked out onto the upper deck of the treehouse, still groggy, cup of coffee in one hand, and that's when I saw them, 6 of Barbara's guests, in matching tank tops that said, Lakeside Legends, throwing what could only be described as a beer-fueled yoga rave in the clearing behind my dock. Someone had dragged in portable speakers, strobe lights, and even a collapsible fire pit that was currently burning something suspiciously synthetic. One guy was hanging a hammock between 2 birch trees, another had set up a foldable bar station made of plywood and bungee cords, and 2 women were spraying glitter onto each other like they were preparing for a music video in the middle of a national park. I leaned on the railing for a long minute, trying to understand how the words temporary usage rights had been twisted in Barbara's mind into permanent right to party on someone else's private land. I went down the ladder, crossed the trail, and stopped at the edge of my property line, arms folded. The party kept going. I watched a guy in cargo shorts accidentally knock over the bar setup and pretend it was a dance move. Then I saw something that made my blood do a slow boil, a small wooden sign staked into the dirt, painted in cheerful colors. Treehouse Guest Lounge, sponsored by the Upper Silver Lake HOA. I don't know who painted it. I don't know who thought this was cute. But I knew who orchestrated it. I stormed back up the trail to grab my phone, ready to take videos, to gather timestamps, to start building the kind of case that could choke even the smuggest small claims judge. But before I could hit record, I noticed something even worse. One of them had climbed the treehouse ladder. He was halfway up when I shouted, and instead of coming down, he waved and shouted, "Barbara said we could take pictures up here!" Like that would somehow stop gravity from punishing him for trespassing. I met him at the halfway point, blocking the final rungs. He reeked of cologne, beer, and arrogance. I told him to turn around. He tried to argue. I didn't move. Eventually, he relented, wobbling back down with a, "Just trying to get the full experience, man." I almost laughed, but there was no humor left in this. Later that afternoon, after the guests had finally packed up and wobbled back to wherever Barbara was hiding them, I pulled the trail cam footage and watched it all unfold in grainy, glorious detail. The glitter. The hammock collapse. The unauthorized ladder climb. Every moment timestamped and clear. I backed it all up, created copies, emailed one to myself, and another to a lawyer friend in the city who owed me a favor from a previous HOA disaster years ago. I didn't expect it to go to trial, but I was preparing for the moment she tried to drag this into a courtroom. Barbara didn't play fair, but she played predictably. That night, I reviewed the community guidelines word for word. Nowhere did it mention shared use of non-communal structures. Nowhere did it empower the president to seize private land for unapproved events. In fact, there were at least 5 violations I could nail her guests on, including unauthorized fire use, noise disturbance, and the introduction of non-biodegradable materials into the landscape, courtesy of the glitter storm. Still, I waited. Because I knew she wasn't done. People like Barbara don't escalate unless they're building towards something. Sure enough, the next day I received an email from the HOA's shared inbox. Not her personal account this time. No, this was the official HOA email, sent out to all members. It read, "Join us for the new Community Lakeside Festival, a weekly gathering celebrating shared serenity and connection. Location, Treehouse Commons." I stared at the screen. Treehouse Commons. She'd invented an entirely new name, pretending the treehouse was now some officially recognized venue. There was a calendar attached. 6 weekends of scheduled events. Music nights. Meditation Mornings. Guest Speaker Series. One of the names listed under hosting was a yoga influencer who once got banned from a resort for using a gong at 4 a.m. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or start printing out cease and desist flyers. I called Darnell again, told him what was happening, and he promised to swing by. In the meantime, I printed out the flyer and highlighted the phrase, Treehouse Commons, with a red marker, taping it to the front of my property fence with a handwritten sign below. This property is privately owned. Trespassers will be reported. But signs don't stop Barbara. Later that week, I spotted her hosting a preview tour for two couples I'd never seen before, walking them along the edge of the trail and gesturing dramatically toward the treehouse like a realtor pitching beachfront property. One of the guests asked something about catering options. I stepped out onto the deck and waved. Barbara stiffened, then smiled, the way a chess player smiles when they think they've trapped you, even though you're 2 moves away from flipping the board. She said loudly, "Don't mind him. He's still adjusting to the community vision." I didn't respond. I just picked up my phone, took a photo of the tour, and emailed it to my lawyer friend with the subject line, "She's selling air now." By Thursday, the news reached the ranger station. Apparently someone, probably a disgruntled neighbor or a trail hiker who didn't like being serenaded with acoustic covers of boy band hits, had filed a report. I didn't know this until Ranger Bennett knocked on my front door, hat in hand, wearing the kind of expression that said he'd rather be inspecting moss growth than mediating HOA theater. He asked if I had permitted any community events on my land. I told him no, and then showed him the signs, the footage, the flyers, and the emails. He took it all in silently, then exhaled and said, "I knew it was her." Turns out Barbara had previously tried to rename part of the community trail to include her maiden name. She had a pattern. Ranger Bennett promised to file a formal note in the station log, documenting the unauthorized events and warning against any future encroachment. He even offered to testify if this went further. I thanked him, handed him a copy of the latest HOA flyer, and said, "If she tries to host a sunrise flute circle here, you'll be my first call." That night, for the first time in weeks, the lake was quiet. No guests. No drones. No Bluetooth speakers cycling through awful remixes of early 2010s hits. Just the wind through the trees, the distant hum of crickets, and the slow creak of my hammock as I watched the moonlight spill across the water. But I knew peace was temporary. Barbara wasn't finished. She tasted attention, and worse, control. She had crafted a narrative in her mind where she was the savior of a community too blind to appreciate her vision. And I was the obstacle. The stubborn, unreasonable obstacle standing between her and the HOA utopia she wanted to manifest. I didn't know what she'd do next, but I could feel it coming. Like a tremor before the quake. It started with a letter that looked official enough to trick a stranger, sealed in a manila envelope and slipped under my front gate like some spy mission dossier. I saw it fluttering there next to the gravel path when I stepped out to water the porch plants, and I didn't even have to open it to know who it was from. The font was too self-important, the envelope too thick, and the return address too pompous. Sure enough, it was stamped from the law offices of Hawthorne and Price, exactly the kind of firm you'd imagine Barbara Hutchins would hire for HOA theatrics, complete with an embossed eagle crest and a signature that looked like it had been drawn by someone auditioning to be a calligrapher for royal wedding invites. The letter alleged that I had been withholding a recreational asset from community use, and that the HOA intended to seek temporary usage enforcement through civil court channels. It ended with a thinly veiled threat about damages and loss of community morale. Community morale. That was a new one. I set the letter on my desk, stared at it for a few minutes, and then called my lawyer friend from the city who had already seen most of this circus unfold through my daily email updates. He read the letter in silence, then said, "This is fluff. It's intimidation paper. She's trying to see if you'll flinch." I didn't. In fact, I got bolder. The following week, I showed up to the emergency court summons in my nicest flannel shirt and jeans, with a binder under one arm and a GoPro video queued up on a tablet. Barbara, in contrast, arrived in what I could only describe as a power suit designed for theatrical impact: red blazer, matching lipstick, clipboard clasped like it was a weapon, and 3 of her HOA board lackeys behind her like jury extras in a daytime courtroom show. She didn't even look at me. The courtroom wasn't fancy, just one of the county annex buildings with flickering fluorescent lights and mismatched chairs. But Barbara walked in like it was the Supreme Court. She handed a packet of documents to the clerk with the self-satisfied smirk of someone who had practiced the handoff in the mirror. I followed suit, calmly passing forward my own folder: copies of the property plat, timestamps from the trail cam, stills from the drone footage, a printed flyer from her fake treehouse festival, and a brief typed statement of how this entire mess violated not just my privacy but at least 4 local ordinances. When the judge walked in, she barely looked up from her file for the first 2 minutes. She was a tired-looking woman in her 60s with silver hair and a tight braid and a courtroom voice that had probably silenced 100 fools before Barbara. When she finally asked Barbara to explain her case, Barbara rose like a pageant contestant and launched into a speech that sounded like she'd swallowed a thesaurus titled, "Words to Make You Sound Powerful." She talked about unity, and visual harmony, and shared experiences, and how the treehouse had always been, symbolically communal, due to its lakeside placement. The judge blinked once, slowly, then looked at me. I didn't rise. I just tapped the tablet and hit play. The video showed one of her guests climbing the ladder, spilling beer on the deck, and shouting, "Dude, this thing is awesome! I'm gonna live stream from the roof!" The audio was crisp. Barbara's name was mentioned twice in the video as the one who told them they could be there. The judge nodded, sighed, and turned back to Barbara. "Did you authorize your guests to use this structure?" she asked. Barbara hesitated, said something about informal approval, and the judge immediately cut her off. "Is it on your property?" Barbara said no. "Is there any document at all, that indicates shared ownership or jurisdiction?" Barbara again said no. The judge leaned back and said, "Then this sounds like trespassing disguised as entitlement. Case dismissed." The words felt like a cannon blast wrapped in silk. I nodded, stood, and began packing up my things while Barbara stood frozen in place, lips parted like she'd been slapped by a ghost. As I left the courtroom, I could hear her arguing with her own people, voices hushed and sharp, like she couldn't believe this fortress she'd built out of bylaws and bluster had crumbled in under 20 minutes. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The dismissal said it all. I drove home with the windows down and the binder still on my passenger seat, feeling like the lake air was a little cleaner than before. But if I thought that was the end, I underestimated just how much Barbara hated losing. Because 2 days later, I got an alert from one of my trail cams, a motion notification around the treehouse stairs. I checked the footage and saw something that made my stomach turn. Barbara herself, alone this time, was walking the edge of the treehouse, clipboard in hand, measuring tape dangling from her wrist. She was jotting something down on a yellow legal pad and peering up at the structure like she was scouting it for demolition. I watched her pause at the support beams, reach into her bag, and pull out an orange tag, the kind utility workers use to mark trees for removal. She tied one to a low-hanging branch. Then another near the base. I could feel my jaw tightening with each tag. I called Darnell, sent him the footage, and told him that if Barbara was preparing some kind of sneak demolition under the guise of visual code enforcement, I wanted it on record. He agreed to log the footage and offered to swing by again the next morning. The next 24 hours were a blur of tension. I reinforced the ladder lock, repositioned the trail cams, and added 2 laminated notices to the base of the tree, one with the county lot map, and one quoting the judge's exact dismissal language. Just in case Barbara decided to send anyone else to inspect the place on her behalf. Sure enough, by dawn, she was back. This time with a clipboard, a measuring wheel, and someone from a landscaping company who looked very confused. I approached calmly, hands in my pockets, and asked what they were doing. Barbara snapped. "We're conducting a compliance review for overhanging vegetation," I said. "This isn't your property. And the court already ruled." The landscaper looked at her, then at me, then said, "Wait, is this